Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor, and today I'm going to be doing a book review for Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. If you guys don't know, this is the third book in the Stormlight Archive series, which is Brandon's huge epic fantasy series that is set on this planet called Roshar, and is set within the Cosmere universe that he has set up with a lot of his adult fantasy books. On Roshar, there are two different types of people. There are Parshendi, they have hard, like, shells on their skin, and they speak with tuning to different emotions, if that makes sense. Doesn't really, but when they're irritated they hum a certain way, and if they're happy they hum a different way. And then there's also regular humans. The two have been at war against each other for a really long time, but there's different types of Parshendi as well. So there's the listeners, who are the people that humans are actually fighting, and then there's also these Parshmen who don't really talk ever, and they just are used as slaves. A long time ago on the planet there were these people that were called Knights Radiant, and they at one point abandoned their values. They broke their vows, their oaths, I guess, and they disappeared. And now at the beginning of the first book, Radiants are starting to re-emerge, and that's basically what this whole book is about. And there's a lot more that's happening other than that, but it's too complicated to describe. This is going to have a review section where the only spoilers are going to be like who's alive at the beginning of this book, and then I'm going to go into a very spoilery discussion after that. As usual with my book reviews, I'm going to go through my pros, go through my cons, give you my rating, and be done. My first pro for this book is that I just absolutely love the character Lift. Lift is the main character of this short story that he did that's called Edge Dancer. It takes place in between books 2 and 3, and she is just the greatest thing in this entire book. Every time that she came up, I was so excited to see her again, and I love how she interacts with the main character of this book. This one follows Dalinar, where the first one follows Kaladin, the second one follows Shallan, this one focuses in on Dalinar. And Lift always comments on Dalinar's butt, and it just makes me laugh so hard. So I absolutely love Lift. She really made this novel for me that much better, and I will read everything about Lift. If he wants to come out with a whole series that's just about Lift, I would read that series. And while we're on Kaladin and Shallan, I really enjoyed them in this book as well. Shallan's tendency to avoid conflict and avoid problems really starts to come up in this book, and I really liked the exploration of that whole thing that she has going on. She's one of my favorites in the series, so I really enjoyed reading about her, and I also really enjoy Kaladin. And I actually thought that it was really interesting that we get a lot of backstory on Syl, his Spren. Those are basically my favorite characters: Lift, Kaladin, Shallan, and Syl. So reading about them was a fantastic time. I really enjoyed that. And with all the characters, I think that Brandon does a really good job of keeping them consistent. The characters only change when there's a reason for them to change, like something happens and then they have to deal with it, and that's why they start changing. They don't just change and become amazing radiance or anything like that. It's a very slow process, and I really appreciated going through each character and seeing the different things that happen to them and how it nudges them in different directions, and they don't just completely turn into different people. Well, another pro for this book was that the ending of this book is just like reveal after reveal after reveal, and I'm like, what? Wait, what is happening? And it made me really excited to continue along with the series because it has so many different things that are happening, and I just can't wait to see what's going to happen with every single one of those different plot threads. There are so many connections of this book with the Cosmere as a whole, and I just can't wait to see what else happens in the future. And Sanderson says that there's always another secret, and that's true with this book. There's literally always another secret that you're finding out, and I loved the ending of this book. A lot of the crossover in this book happens with Warbreaker, which is one of his earlier published books. So I definitely suggest reading Warbreaker before you read this book, because you will not know all of the connections between the two if you haven't read Warbreaker before. But if you have, you're in for a huge treat because, wow, so there's a lot of crossover. I really love in this book that we got a lot more exploring of the magic system. We learn a lot more about the Heralds, we learn a lot more about the Unmade, we learn a lot more about the Spren, and of course we learn more about the Parshendi and the Knights Radiant. So I just loved seeing all of those things and understanding them better. Another big pro for this book is that you can see Brandon changing the way that he thinks, I guess, in the real world. There is a openly gay character in this book called Drahi? I don't know how to pronounce his name. And he's in a relationship with a character named Dur, and Drahi is actually based off of one of Brandon's buddies from college who's gay, and I think that Dur might be his buddy's partner. I'm not sure. But I liked that he had these openly gay characters in this book because Brandon in the past has not been the most supportive of gay marriage specifically. He wrote this article a long time ago, and it surfaces every couple of years and people start freaking out at him. But you can see now that he's a lot more accepting, and that's made its way into his books with characters like Drahi, and it literally calls out one of the characters for not understanding it as well or not being as nice about it as he could have, and another character puts him in his place and he's like, no, you're wrong. And there's a big message in this book about acceptance and accepting yourself and accepting others, and that happens throughout the entire thing. So I really loved that message. This book also harps on journey before destination, which is one of the oaths that the Radiants take, and I would say that acceptance and journey before destination, it's kind of the two main things that are played with in this novel, so liked those. And my last pro that I'm going to talk about in this non-spoiler section is going to be that I really loved the world history that we got, and seeing the history of humans with Parshendi and all of that. I absolutely loved that. I love history. I majored in history in college, so history is something that I absolutely love, so I love that we got a lot of world history in this book. Now let's talk about a couple of my cons. My biggest con for this book is that I just hate Dalinar. I think he is so boring, and this whole book focuses in on Dalinar, and most of the chapters are about him, so I just found them so slow and so boring. His like big secret that everyone already knows about isn't that big of a deal. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And I just think that his secret really was dangled for way too long before it was revealed, so when it got revealed, I didn't care at all. I just wanted to continue along with the other characters, and he just is constantly in his own head talking about how much of a monster he is and how many people he's killed in the past and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, shut up. He really started to annoy me, if you couldn't tell. And because of that whole Dalinar situation, the book has some weird pacing. And so there's like a section in the middle of the book for like 350, 400 pages where I was bored out of my mind. It was so slow, and I actually put the book down for 2 months because I was not really interested in continuing reading it for a while. So overall, there were some really interesting things going on with the magic system and the world and the history and the characters that I did like, but it being about Dalinar really just brought it down for me because he is the worst. Because of my pros and my cons, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It's my least favorite in the Stormlight Archive series so far, but I am happy to be done with Dalinar, and hopefully the next book, whoever that's going to be about, will be a lot more interesting. That's going to be my non-spoiler section. Now let's go into some very spoilery discussions of this book. So if you haven't read this book, go away. If you have, let's chat. Since I was already talking about Dalinar, let's just start off with him. The way that I'm going to do this discussion is each character. As I said before, I thought that he was really boring in this book. When I was writing down notes about this book, it was pretty funny because I was like, Dalinar just doesn't seem like a real person. He just doesn't seem to have very much passion, which is in hindsight funny because he was fighting Odium, who keeps saying that he is passion or whatever. The secret that's been dangled in front of us for the past, what, like 3,000, almost 4,000 pages, is that Dalinar is the one who ordered his wife's death by accident. That is not, I feel like, that big of a secret because you already knew that something terrible happened with this wife situation because he went and got his memory taken away. So you knew that he had something to do with her death, and you knew that it was bad enough that he ended up getting his memory taken away. So it shouldn't have been that shocking that he was somehow involved in her death. And when he finds out that he's the one that's responsible for her death, he's like, oh my gosh, and I just didn't care because we already knew that that was basically the case. I don't know. I just feel like I'm shitting on Dalinar a lot, but he was really boring. Also, let's talk about Dalinar's showdown with Odium at the very end when they're at Thaylen. I thought it was a little bit anticlimactic because he just starts to take over him. Kind of like Voldemort takes over Harry Potter for like half a second. He like goes into his body and then he's like, oh, you'll never be loved. And then he defeats Voldemort by doing that. That's kind of what happened with Dalinar and Odium. My battery died. So I was saying that Odium starts to take over Dalinar to make Dalinar his champion, and basically all Dalinar has to do is be like, I accept my own faults, journey before destination, and then he defeats Odium. So it was kind of convenient and anticlimactic because it wasn't that big of a showdown, but everything that was happening around that was awesome. So it was also very cool that Dalinar was able to channel honor, I guess. Like, he became a host for a dead shard for like 5 seconds kind of thing. I don't know what that whole thing was about, but that was awesome. And I'm really curious to see what will happen in the future with Dalinar and being connected with Stormfather and being connected with Honor's shadow. So I don't know how that's gonna happen, but that's pretty cool. I'm excited to see what goes on there. And I also really liked at the end when Dalinar requests that Navani start teaching him how to write. It's starting to show that this world, after the desolation, separated men and women into different gender roles, where women were forced to do one-handed artistic stuff. The men are the ones that have these shard plates and these swords, and they are the ones that are fighting. And throughout this novel, you see that those start to break down because of the one girl who joins Kaladin's squires. Shallan and a bunch of other people start having swords, and now Dalinar and Rinnarin are starting to learn how to write and everything like that. So it's starting to show that those gender roles are breaking down and people can just do whatever they want. So I'm excited to see in the future of this series how the world reacts to these gender roles being broken down. Next, let's talk about Alcohar. How do you pronounce that guy's name? Elcohar? I really enjoyed his overall story arc from start to finish. He starts off as this huge brat, then he starts getting annoyed that Dalinar has more influence than him, and he starts looking for support from the wrong people, and then he finally finds that Dalinar is correct, and then he wants to be subservient to Dalinar, but then he has to be strong for his people, and then he ends up dying. And I thought that it was a very nice character arc. I really enjoyed reading about him and seeing him go through everything. When he started saying the oaths to become a Knight Radiant, I was like, oh no, this is not gonna end up well for you. And then he ends up being killed, and I was just like, bye. I felt like it was a very well-timed death, and I think that it works really well with the story. But at that death event thing, I was so confused because I did not know what happened to his son, because he's holding his son and he's like saying the oaths and everything like that, and then he gets killed, and then his son gets like kicked out of the way or whatever. I just figured that someone would like pick him up and take him with them. So I was just really confused on what was happening to him, and then later on we found out that the king's son was still alive, and then later on he is retrieved when Drehi and the other guy are retrieved as well. So I was just a little confused on that one scene, but now that we know that his son is still alive, I'm very curious to see how Elkahar's son fits into this world and fits in with other people of his family. Like, is Navani gonna raise him and he's gonna be like a little bit of a stepson for Dalinar slash, what is it, like a grandnephew or whatever? And what is his role within their family's power system, I guess? Because Yasna is now queen. Is he still the one that's gonna inherit the throne or whatever? So I don't know how that's gonna play out, and I'm very curious to see what happens with that. Yasna is now queen, which is understandable because she is so strong-willed. I felt like in this book she wasn't utilized as much as she could have been, because she is a Knight Radiant, that she has her own power, she is strong, and Dalinar just didn't really use her all that much. And now that she's queen, I'm very curious to see what will happen with that, because Yasna knows that to run the country she needs to be separate and independent of Dalinar. So it'll be interesting because Dalinar has been the one that's had all of this power for so long. She is not always in agreement with Dalinar, so it'll be interesting to see how that power dynamic plays out. And also I feel like Yasna hasn't had time to grieve for her brother yet, and if Elkahar's son ends up being Yasna's heir kind of thing, because Yasna doesn't seem the type of person that's gonna want to be a baby making machine. But there's so many things with Yasna becoming queen that will be interesting to see, because men are the ones that lead, and so Yasna becoming queen is going to have some repercussions with that in the whole gender role thing like I was talking about before. I wonder if the Ardents and stuff will try to force her to get married and to have children and have a line, or if the Ardents will allow her to have Elgahar's son as her heir, and then she doesn't have to worry about dealing with the stupidity of men in this world. She kind of reminds me of Urza from Fairy Tail, where she is so strong and so powerful that people are intimidated by her, and then she has all of these walls that keep people out, and I think that she's going to be one of the main players in breaking down these different gender roles that this world has, especially the Alethi. I'm also very curious to see what happens with Shallan with Yasna, because Shallan is Yasna's ward, but now Shallan is married, but then Shallan was wanting to still be Yasna's ward and learn from her. I hope Shallan follows through with that and we get some interactions between Shallan and Yasna and them teaming up to do like amazing things would be really fun, and I hope that happens. I felt like Shallan was one of the most interesting characters in this book, and also this series in general, because when Shallan was little, her mother tried to murder her, and then her dad starts to become belligerent and violent and abusive, and she ends up killing her father by poisoning him and then strangling him. She's been very good at putting up all of these different walls and compartmentalizing her life so she doesn't remember everything at one time, or she doesn't think about everything at one time. And I liked seeing how her splitting herself up into all of these different characters has really affected her, and the characters start to take over and she starts to lose who she is, and she doesn't know who she is anymore or who she wants to be. I kind of felt like Shallan was a little bit like the Morgan from Celtic mythology, because the Morgan is 3 different people in one, and Shallan is now Veil, Shallan, and Radiant in one body, and they speak to each other and they take over the body at different times. And I really liked those subtle shifts in character when the name would change or their style of thinking would change a little bit. I thought that that was really well done. Veil was very utilized in this book, and I thought that Radiant was not used as much as she could have been. But following those 3-ish, 1/3 characters was very compelling. I always found the parts that had Shallan in it to be very interesting, and I would speed through those parts. I like that Shallan was unable to make Veil a functioning character, really. Because Shallan has never lived on the streets, she's never been required to learn street smarts or anything like that. And then Veil, because she's just pretending to be street smart, doesn't actually succeed in what they're doing when they're trying to give the food to the people. Veil ends up getting them killed or hurt a lot, and I thought that it just made sense. One of my favorite parts of this book was the story that Shallan tells Pattern, and then later when Wit brings it back up to Shallan and actually continues the story and says what it's actually about. The girl who looked up, and it's a story where this little girl is living in this walled in area, and she looks up and she's like, why is there a wall here? And no one else is curious enough to find out, and she climbs the wall, and then she sees that there are steps on the other side. Her version of the story is that the people that were living within this walled area were considered monsters. The people that were on the outside of the wall were trying to keep those people away from them. And then Wit's version added on that the people were actually living in the dark, and when they got out, they broke off a little piece of honor and brought it back to the people, and that's when light really started to shine. And although they live in a more dangerous area now because of releasing everything that happened when they took part of honor with them, they wouldn't change that because now they're living in the light and they're living with honor. So I really loved that story. I thought that that was really awesome. And Hoid is always the easiest Cosmere connection for me to find because he's in so many different books. But I really loved how much Hoid was in this book as Wit, and Wit's role with Shallan. I loved that. I really love seeing him, especially because his powers are very curious to me, and how he doesn't really control where he is. He's just brought to where he needs to be, and then he has to figure out what he's supposed to be doing when he gets there. And I love seeing him play characters and like slow down his healing and getting his teeth knocked out. So I just really love Wit, and when I see him it makes me feel better about myself because I'm able to make a Cosmere connection. And going back to that story for 1 second, that is the one that actually kind of shows that humans were actually the Voidbringers in the first place, but for some reason I didn't make that connection until after I was done reading it. I loved that story because it had multiple layers to it and I enjoyed it. Shallan in the final battle was such a badass. She was so cool. She made all of these different people and gave them little parts of herself so that they acted more human-like and they were making noise and fighting and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed Shallan's role in this final battle, and it seemed like it was very taxing, so I appreciated that she was out of commission for a little bit after that. And it showed that when she's weakened, she's more apt to separate into her different personas, Veil, Radiant, and Shallan. And I also thought it was really funny when Lift interacted with Shallan and was like, hey lady, we need help. Can you stop hugging yourself? I laughed actually, when I read that. Her attraction to Kaladin is finally resolved, I guess, because it's just sectioned off with Veil, and she pushes that down. You can tell that Adolin really narrows in on Shallan and really gets her, I guess. He's able to tell that she's shifting from personality to personality, and he knows when Shallan is actually being her true self. So I really liked that, because Adolin will be able to keep Shallan grounded in herself and keep her from making mistakes as Veil or making mistakes as Radiant. I was so excited when Shallan finally was reunited with her brothers, because they have no idea what's going on, so that's pretty funny. I laughed out loud when they showed up and Shallan was freaking out and she like started crying and ruining her makeup, and Navani pops her head in. She's like, "I'll delay the ceremony." I don't know why I thought that was so funny, but I actually laughed when that happened, and I am just happy for Shallan that she is happy with Adolin, and now she's got her brothers, and something is actually going right for her. I do wonder where her brothers are going to end up, because I feel like they're not just going to be sitting there, they're going to want to get involved. I am very curious to see what happens with Shallan and Adolin's marriage, because Shallan's a Radiant and Adolin isn't currently. And if Shallan gets pregnant, I'm going to be like so shocked, but also not shocked at the same time, if that makes any sense. I'm just like picturing her being a pregnant fighting woman, and it would be really funny and fun to see, but I don't think that will happen. And I think that she will also play a role in breaking down these gender roles, so yeah, love her. I really liked Kaladin's growth in this book. He definitely grew in terms of thinking of us versus them. In this book, he's forced to interact, and actually he becomes friends with a bunch of the singer Parshendi. And during that scene where Elkahar is killed, he ends up seeing a lot of his friends get killed as well. Saw, in particular, ends up dying in that battle, and it just hits him really hard, and he starts to flip out. And especially because he is bonded with an honor spren, it makes him not find as much honor in this war that's been going on between the Parshendi and the humans. They could just, you know, live and be happy and interact, but instead they are both vying for power and trying to kill off the other one or use them as slaves. So I liked that whole us versus them thing is not a real thing, because we're all people. And the us versus them thing can be applied to a lot of different situations, because one of the first steps in having those awful dictatorships and stuff like that, like Hitler did it, where he created an us versus them. He created us versus Jews. A lot of people nowadays will start that kind of conversation, and people are trying to make the other side seem monstrous and evil and not human. And the moment that you start talking like that is when dangerous things can start to happen. And I thought it was interesting that it happened with Kaladin and his honor spren Syl. I really loved seeing Kaladin's squires start to grow with their powers and everything like that. They start to be able to fly, and some of them actually become knights by themselves, like Lopen and Teft both end up becoming Radiants, so I really loved that, and I'm curious to see how that will play out, because now Kaladin, Teft, and Lopen are all at the same level. They're all the same amount of Knight Radiant or whatever, and I'm wondering if Kaladin will still be in charge of them, or if they'll also have their own thing going on, and they're all just under Dalinar. We'll see. I was actually a little bit shocked by Teft and Lopen becoming Knights Radiants and bonding with honor spren, because they made it seem like in this book that there weren't that many honor spren left, because all of Syl's siblings have end up being broken and they don't reproduce all that often. So I don't know how many honor spren there are to have these wind runners. It seems like there's a fair amount of them because of how easy it was for Lopen and for Teft to become knights. But I did appreciate getting all of that background with Syl, and it was interesting to see that Syl was a little bit of a light eyes in the Spren world, the spirit world. What is it called? Shadesmar? And she is one of the upper class people of this world, and she was afraid that Kaladin wouldn't like her as much because he hates light eyes and stuff like that. And I am very curious to see what will happen with that, because I think the honor spren still want Syl to go back to wherever they were trying to take her, and I'm curious to see what will happen with that whole situation, and if more honor spren will come to Roshar, or if they'll stay in Shadesmar and try to keep the rest of the honor spren from going over to Roshar, the physical realm. I felt so awful for Rock at the end battle when he actually uses a weapon to save Kaladin's life. I'm wondering how that breakdown is going to happen, because you know it's going to happen in the next book. He's definitely going to have some type of repercussions for using that weapon and taking a life kind of thing. And my last thing that I'm going to talk about with Kaladin is I'm very curious to learn more about this girl named Tara. It was his first crush or first love or whatever, and I think that she's going to end up coming back into play because Shallan chose Adolin, and now Kaladin needs some type of companionship, especially because Syl keeps pushing it on him and saying how he needs to find someone to be happy kind of thing. Not that you need to find anyone to be happy, but she knows that Kaladin needs companionship, and I think that she might come back into play, hopefully. One random thought of mine when it came to this Tara girl is that I am curious if she is descended from the same people that taught Nohadin how to make Thaylen bread, because Nohadin in that vision that Dalinar has where Nohadin is younger and he wants to make bread, they make a big point about this Thaylen bread, and then later on when Kaladin is thinking about Tara is gonna make him bread or invites him to make Thaylen bread. So I wonder if there's something there, but obviously it's just bread, so I don't know. But it would be very interesting if there was some type of connection between Nohadin and this Tara girl. How many more pages of notes do I have? Next on the ticket is Adolin. What the heck is up with him not getting any type of punishment for murdering Sadeas? I know that Adolin revealed it at like the perfect time to not get repercussions because everyone was hating Sadeas' family because they betrayed everyone and went over to Odium's side, and Odium used them as puppets, and they were the main force that was invading Thaylen and everything like that. But Adolin still murdered him, and I feel like he should get some type of punishment for that, other than him using it as a chip for not becoming king because he doesn't want to be king. And the whole thing with Shallan and him where he's like, I murdered Sadeas, and Shallan's like, okay, cool, good. I'm like, what? But everyone was very relaxed about Adolin being a murderer, so I don't know what that was about. I felt like someone should have been upset about that. And also Adolin was just a big human punching bag in this book. He almost dies like 3 times or something like that, and I think he gets his stomach ripped open twice, and he always ends up being healed or whatever, but still, I was like, damn, how much abuse is this guy gonna take? I really thought that the whole him murdering Sadeas thing was gonna be a bigger deal, and it wasn't, so that was a little disappointing. But one cool thing that I'm really excited to see is what happens with Maya, his sword. Maya Lauren, I guess is her full name, and it seems like Maya's a dead cultivation spren. I wonder if she will start to heal and Adolin will become a Knight Radiant with this shard blade, because during the course of the novel you can see that she starts to get a little bit more personality and she starts to really bond with Adolin. And during the battle that happens in Shadesmar, she actually protects Adolin without Adolin doing anything to her. She does it on her own volition. So I'm very curious to see if Maya will start to heal completely and if she will become better. Because Syl says at some point, I don't remember when, that Spren don't die as much as they break. So they don't really die, they just can't function. And so Maya is starting to heal, and I wonder if that will allow Adolin to become a Knight Radiant and have powers of his own. Maya now comes back after 7 seconds instead of 10 and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'm really pumped to see what happens with Maya, because even though she's creepy as hell in Shadesmar, I feel bad for her, and I really hope that she does get healed, if not to bond with Adolin, just to be healed, and that could be used as a way to open up the gates between Shadesmar and the physical realm. A lot of Spren feel like humans are not worth their bonds anymore, because when the last Radiants all abandoned their vows or whatever, all of those Spren ended up breaking and are now the shard plate / swords that are floating around Roshar. And if those are able to be healed and fixed, I think that the paths between the different realms will be a lot easier to travel between. And also that makes me think, are shards able to be healed as well? So will Honor eventually heal? But he's not a Spren, he's a god, but Spren are like little gods, so I don't know, maybe Honor will eventually heal and come back to save the day and kick out Odium because he sucks. But yeah, we'll see. Speaking of broken Spren, let's talk about the corrupted Spren that Renarin is bonded with. What the heck's going on with that? Renarin betraying everyone with these false visions of the future. Like, they can become true, but sometimes they don't become true. So I wonder what role that will have to play in the future books, and Shallan getting advised not to trust anyone that can see the future kind of thing. It applied to Kaladin, but it also would apply to Renarin. And I just think it's interesting that his corrupted Spren that he's bonded to still allows him to pull on Stormlight, and he's still a Truth Watcher, but his Spren is corrupted by Odium, so I don't know what is happening with that. If Renarin is going to be forced to go over to Odium's side, I don't know, but you can bet that I'm excited to find out. And I liked the scene between Renarin and Yasna when Yasna doesn't kill Renarin and she shows that she actually does have a heart and loves her cousin. I love that Renarin is also on the autism spectrum. I'm happy to see that representation in fantasy. And just one other thing with Renarin is that during this novel I was like, man, I feel like we're ignoring Renarin a lot. And then I realized it's because Dalinar ignores Renarin like all the time and never really even thinks about him. And so this book rarely thought about Renarin at all, and he's just like a very small side character that's going on in the background, and then he ended up having an important role of seeing the future and everything like that. So I think that in the future books Renarin will play a more prominent role. In this one he didn't really, but it made sense because Dalinar is a bad father and doesn't care about Renarin. Next, let's talk about Venli, because she had a huge role in this book, even though she didn't have that many chapters. I love seeing how Venli interacted with the newly awakened Parshendi, especially when the Fused were using Venli as propaganda, really, to recruit all of the singers, and her being the last listener. I don't believe that she's the last one, but it was interesting to see that she's having to go through a death of her own culture because there are no more listeners that are around anymore. At least she doesn't think so. And seeing her interact with the singers and trying to give them her culture was cool to see, especially at the very end when she goes up to the singers on her own volition and she's like, let me tell you about your culture. She is like the Parshendi's last connection to what they used to be, and now she'll be able to start the Parshendi culture all over again and hopefully get it going with. And I also thought it was interesting with the singers how it really depended on where they're from. They have the culture of the people that they lived with. So the singers from Alethi have safe hands and everything like that, and they act like Alethi people, and the people from Thaylen act like the people from Thaylen act, and they have a connection to their homelands. They have a connection to those places that they grew up, even though that they were treated not great and they were treated as slaves. And them being conflicted was very interesting for me, and I'm excited to see how the singers will evolve over time with Venli sharing all of their history with the newly awoken singers, and the singers bringing the culture of the different people that they lived with them, so they have more facial expressions and everything like that. So I liked that whole situation because it makes sense. And I think now that Venli is a knight radiant, is she radiant now? Because she bonded with Timber, who I think was hanging around Eshonai before and now is with Venli. That will be a very interesting plot line in the future of the books. What is she? Number one, is she a radiant? Her Spren captured a void Spren, so she's able to appear like the Fused with the red eyes, but then she also can take in Stormlight. So I don't know, I'm just excited. I wonder what powers Venli will end up being able to have, what kind of radiant power she'll be able to take advantage of, and how she'll use them in the future. One thing that I didn't love as much was that Seth ended up choosing Dalinar as his path that he commits himself to. One, because I don't really like Dalinar that much, but two, I was really hoping that Seth would remain some type of morally gray character that wasn't on either side, wasn't on the human side and wasn't on the Parshendi side. I was hoping he would be somewhere in the middle and do his own thing, because he's such a badass with his martial arts and fighting abilities, and I just feel like he could have towed the line between the two instead of committing to Dalinar. But obviously there'll be some type of tension because Seth was the one who killed Gavilar, and now that Yasna is queen and a knight radiant, it'll be interesting to see how they interact. And also with Dalinar being the brother of the person he assassinated, I don't know, I just feel like they're being way too receptive to Seth and allowing him to come to them. I don't know, but I'm excited to see how that all plays out. I just wish that he had stayed more neutral. But he obviously is going to have a big role to play, especially because he's carrying Nightblood, which is a sword that was made by Vasher, who is from the Warbreaker book. Speaking of Warbreaker crossovers, I am so slow. I did not make those connections for the longest time. I don't know why. It's been a long time since I read Warbreaker, and I think I'm going to go back and reread that this year and hopefully do a review on it. It took me so long to realize that I had read Nightblood before. Like, I'm like, oh, this sword sounds very familiar. Where have I read about this before? I'm dumb. And then it took me so long to figure out that Azure is Vivenna. So far in this video, I have run out of space on my card, and I also have run out of battery. So Heal is actually Vasher. I'm like, what the heck? Why did it take me so long to figure that out? Azure even wraps her arm with her cloak. Her hair changes colors. I do not know why it took me so long to realize that she was Vivenna, and she is a world hopper, apparently, so that's interesting. I'm very curious to know what happened between the ending of Warbreaker and this book, because it seems that she has been through a lot, and I want to know what that is. So I think that he's eventually going to write a Warbreaker 2. I don't know if there's any concrete plans to do so, but I want to know what happens with Vivenna now, because I saw her again, and what the heck. She even talks about stuff that happens during Warbreaker in this book, so I just need to go back and read Warbreaker just because I want to now. But also, why are they here? What are they doing? Do they know where humans originally came from? Because do we even know that? Which planet the humans that are on Roshar came from originally? I don't know. There's just a lot of things going on with that whole situation, and I was loving it. And also, I feel like there are so many things I missed, but there's no way I'm going back and rereading this book because I hate Dalinar. And the last couple of things that I want to talk about in the spoiler section are, one, Turavangian. What the heck is going on with him? Why doesn't he just die? He's so old, and he's just causing so much trouble. And now he's partnered up with Odium, and I don't know what they're going to be doing. And then also, I'm very interested to see Moash's role in the future of the books, because he's now killed a herald, and I think now that the heralds are killed, there's not even an option to keep the fused from coming back. Yeah, it was so much fun. I really enjoyed it, like I said, but because I don't like Dalinar very much, I found it to be boring for like 300 pages in the middle, and I just didn't enjoy reading about Dalinar. But everything else was very interesting, as I've talked your ear off about it today. If you have any thoughts, leave them down in the comments, especially because there are definitely things from this book that I didn't make connections on, and I would love to be informed about them, because I don't really go on to a lot of those forums that they talk about all the different theories and everything like that. So if you guys made any connections that I missed, let me know so that I can be up to date on all the Cosmere knowledge. And if you guys have any thoughts about any of the things that I discussed here, I just am ready to get going and talk about Oathbringer with you guys in the comments, so do that please. So that's going to be my review and discussion on Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. If you liked it, please give it a big thumbs up, and as I said before, comment down below with anything you want to discuss about. If you guys want to see me read and review / do a discussion on Warbreaker, let me know that as well, and I will talk to you guys next time.